Total war. It's on. That's the promise from Colombia's new president, Abelardo de la Espriella, who's set to be sworn in tomorrow. He is not shy about telling people either. He's made a total crackdown on gangs, insurgents, and paramilitaries alike the cornerstone of his platform, and he plans a sweeping list of executive decrees to kick things off on day one. This comes against the backdrop of a Colombia that is starting to spiral back into the violence it was supposed to have escaped. Car bombings are becoming more regular. Guerrilla groups have expanded their territory in key sectors. In an eerie echo of neighboring Ecuador's descent into violence, a presidential candidate was assassinated last summer. And just yesterday, Colombian police intercepted an inaugural gift, a bus that was packed with 420 kilos of highly explosive ammonium nitrate that was making its way towards Espriella's inauguration site. In short, if it's a war he wants, it's a war he seems certain to get. The transition. The transition tomorrow is going to be a little different than most. In fact, there were concerns that it might not happen at all. It comes after the outgoing president has spent a month accusing his successor of working with hostile foreign powers against his party and repeatedly suggesting, without evidence, that the election was rigged. That same outgoing president, if reporting is to be believed, won't even be attendance at the ceremony and has actually banned any use of the military at the inauguration entirely. Now, if that's ringing some bells for you, we can assure you that you didn't accidentally click on a video from 2021, nor are you experiencing intense déjà vu regarding the outcome of Donald Trump's loss to Joe Biden. This time around, it's Colombia's outgoing left-wing president Gustavo Petro who seems to have taken a page from Trump, only instead of blaming Democrats and rigged voting machines, the bogeyman is Israel. The dispute has upended the entire transition, and although we fully expect Espriella to be sworn in tomorrow at 3 p.m. local time, it's certainly made for some heated exchanges. Espriella, who styles himself as the second coming of El Salvador's Nayib Bukele in both appearance and policy proposals, has blasted Petro as attempting to orchestrate a coup against him by undermining the election. He has called on the armed forces to ignore Petro's orders should they undermine democracy, and suspended the behind-the-scenes transition committee entirely. Given that Petro was term-limited, he actually wasn't even the candidate running against Espriella. That guy, Ivan Cepeda, has conceded the election and has basically spent the last month trying to awkwardly sidestep what his longtime ally Petro has been up to. Assuming the inauguration all goes well, though, we have a pretty good idea of what Espriella's first moves will be. In his first few days in office, he plans to sign somewhere around 90 executive decrees ranging from security, the economy, healthcare, and education. At least in the early days of his administration, he's likely to have to rely pretty hard on executive decrees, given that his party holds a total of 0 seats in Congress, though they have recently formed a pact with the National Salvation Party, which gives them 3 senators and 1 representative. Luckily for him, the Colombian executive has a considerable amount of power, and Latin American parties that win the presidency out of nowhere and then rule despite having little representation are just sort of a thing lately. Javier Milei's party down in Argentina had only 15% and 10% of the seats in the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate respectively, which has been more of a thorn in his side on certain issues rather than an insurmountable barrier. But while Milei wanted to reshape Argentina's economy in radical ways, Espriella plans to launch a full-on fight with some extremely powerful gangs and narco-insurgents. He plans to get to work building at least 10 El Salvador-style mega-prisons in remote parts of the country to be guarded directly by the Colombian military to prevent gangs from taking them over. After winning the election back in June, he put the gangs operating in his country on notice by saying, "To those who have sown violence, terror, drug trafficking, and corruption all these years, your time is up." And when asked about what awaits those who don't comply, his answer was quite simply the wrath of God. Now, if you were expecting him to soften his stance as the inauguration draws near, you'll come away from this video disappointed. When asked about the human rights record of the Salvadoran model that he wants to import, his response was, human rights problems with who? With the same phony political hacks from NGOs chartered by the international left who defend the bandits? In other words, from 3:01 p.m. tomorrow, Bogota time, it is game on. The only question is this a game Espriella can actually win? And before we get into the question of whether Colombia's new president can win a total war, here's a quick breather to tell you all about our side project fronts.co. Regular fans of this channel will know the drill. It's our subscriber site where we publish exclusive videos and articles going deeper into the conflicts shaping our world. But not even the biggest WarFronts fanboys will know about the latest improvements. Starting next week, Front subscribers will not only get access to exclusive videos, articles, and podcasts, but will also unlock an ad-free viewing experience of all WarFronts content. So yeah, from next week, every single new episode of WarFronts will also be available to watch on fronts.co with no adverts, no sponsors, no promos like this, because you'd already be subscribed. And this isn't a new tier, we're introducing the whole experience, exclusive content 5 days a week plus ad-free viewing, still costs just $5 a month or $50 a year. So if you want more of me telling you about war and less of me telling you about our wonderful sponsors, head to fronts.co. Again, that's fronts.co, it's $5 a month. And now, back to Colombia's looming total war. Tough inheritance. So, if you need a sense as to the direction Colombia is headed in, look no further than the events of last weekend when a truck packed with explosives pulled up next to a police headquarters in Cucuta, alongside the border with Venezuela, and detonated. At least 11 officers and 3 civilians were hurt, 2 of whom were left in critical condition. Now, in case you're wondering, no, car bombs are not the norm in Colombia. At least they haven't been in well over a decade. The country was long home to intense guerrilla warfare with leftist insurgencies, right-wing paramilitaries, and drug cartels, all fighting both the state and each other from the 1960s onward. Pablo Escobar, for those less familiar with one of Netflix's finest dramas, bombed a civilian airplane and parked a bus full of explosives outside the intelligence service's headquarters. A total war all his own. But in 2016, that was all supposed to stop. The government signed a peace accord with FARC, the largest and best armed of the guerrillas, effectively ending the combat phase of the war. Importantly, though, the deal was the first step, not a final outcome, and you can probably guess by the fact that the new president is still running around and making military salutes and demanding total war that things didn't exactly go according to plan. The peace deal was not popular in Colombia. When the government held a referendum to ratify it, voters narrowly rejected it, although the government then wound up forcing it through regardless. The upshot, though, was that when the next president neglected core parts of the deal, like providing alternative crops for peasants growing coca, it didn't cause much outrage. This gave the FARC dissidents the excuse they needed to justify their return to arms smuggling, although the various splinter groups that have since emerged are far less well-armed than FARC ever was. Additionally, it's also worth pointing out that FARC was only ever the biggest of the insurgent groups. Smaller guerrilla factions like the National Liberation Army, or ELN, never stopped fighting the state. Speaking of the ELN, they've been behind some of the worst violence in recent years. Back in January 2025, the group unleashed its own total war in Catatumbo, which is part of the Department of North Santander. The dispute was between them and a distant offshoot group from FARC called Front 33, which had spent most of the last decade taking over the coca fields and smuggling routes in rural parts of the country, a part that the ELN very much considered to be theirs. All told, there were more than 60,000 people displaced in the first few months of fighting, along with roughly 17,000 effectively being sealed into the villages by the rebels for an indefinite period of time. The violence more or less continued unabated across 2025, and by the year's end, over 100,000 had been forced to flee in what amounted to the country's worst humanitarian disaster in decades. While North Santander has seen the worst of the violence, it's far from the only department seeing an uptick. There have been a number of assassination attempts, including unsuccessfully against Petro himself. Presidential candidate Miguel Uribe was not as fortunate, though. He was shot in the streets of Bogotá last summer and succumbed to his injuries. Had things gone down differently, Uribe might have been the one being sworn in. Espriella didn't even launch his campaign until after his death, and Uribe was polling first in July last summer. All this violence has made the last decade of relative peace in the country look like something of an exception rather than the norm, given that the underlying causes of the guerrilla warfare were never fully resolved. It was actually that very issue that got Petro elected in the first place. He ran for and took office in 2022 on the platform that his country had spent the past 60 years trying to shoot its way out of an insurgency that required negotiations to fully resolve. His approach was to basically discuss everything with everyone all at once. Guerrillas, dissidents, far-right paramilitaries, urban gangs, you name it. At the time, the FARC had just handed over significant portions of their weapons cache on the basis that it was worth it to get a seat at the negotiating table, so there was still some sense to it anyway. The results of his total peace plan are, as you could tell from the spiral of violence Colombia finds itself in, not encouraging, so much so that it's widely accepted that Petro's implementation of total peace was botched. In a gesture of goodwill, Petro opened his presidency by declaring a unilateral ceasefire, which eased off military pressure on the insurgents and gangs and allowed them to rebuild and consolidate territory. Cepeda largely conceded as much during the presidential campaign, arguing that if he were to win, he would be the guy to double down on the plan, and that unlike Petro, he'd actually get it right. Given how close the election ended up being, this seems to have had more credibility with Colombian voters than you might expect, despite Petro's inclination to run off his mouth, including sarcastically tweeting Heil Hitler at a newspaper column endorsing his opponent. As a result, the presidential runoff wound up being a man advocating total peace and another advocating total war. And total peace very nearly won a second chance. But very nearly won is not the same as winning. In the end, Espriella carried the day by roughly 1% of the vote. As a result, after the failure of total peace, Colombia is now going to try its exact opposite. Not their first rodeo. Throughout all of today's episode, we've been highlighting concerns that Colombia is descending back into violence, which inherently means that they've both been there before and gotten themselves out of it. Although it's not towards Colombia's past that Espriella is looking for inspiration. Instead, Colombia's new president is fully basing his approach on that of Bukele in El Salvador, pointing to the fact that El Salvador was running a homicide rate of 106 per 100,000 back in 2015, one of the worst on the planet. By last year, that rate was down to something like 1.3. Now that may sound great initially, and it is genuine progress, doubtlessly why Bukele's approval rating is consistently in the high 80s or even 90s. What isn't covered quite as often, depending on what circles you inhabit, is that Salvadorans lost the right to be told why they were being arrested and the right to a lawyer, while the state gave itself 15 days to hold somebody before a judge had to lay eyes on them. Around 90,000 people have been swept up in the 4 years since, roughly 1 in 11 of whom were quietly released again once it became apparent that they were actually innocent. That is, thousands of innocent people who sometimes spent months stuffed into crowded cells with some of the worst killers on Earth, which we can't imagine was very much fun. To make matters worse, at least 470 have died in custody, a testament to the conditions inside the now infamous CCOT facilities. Despite that, or perhaps because of it and the results it's achieved in transforming El Salvador, Bukele has achieved something of a rock star status across much of Latin America. While some of the claims are exaggerated, Bukele has previously said El Salvador is safer than Europe, despite plenty of European countries having a murder rate lower than El Salvador's 1.3 per 100,000, the change in the Central American nation is undeniable. And now Espriella wants to do the same thing for Colombia. But the thing is, Colombia isn't El Salvador, which is both going to give Espriella a vastly different set of challenges, along with some added experience along the way. For starters, one of the biggest challenges that he'll face is the sheer size of the country. Colombia is somewhere around 54 times larger than El Salvador, with much of its landmass taking the form of rural, dense jungle areas. El Salvador has its fair share of rural parts as well, but the gangs that Bukele was up against operated almost entirely in the cities and in a country the size of Massachusetts, or a hair smaller than Wales for our British viewers. Nowhere is really that off the grid. Colombia's situation is almost the polar opposite. There is certainly gang and paramilitary activity inside the cities, but Colombia's insurgents absolutely thrive in the rural countryside. The ELN is a case study here. It was founded back in 1964 by radical students and priests who'd been spending their free time reading about Cuba and the revolution that was taking place there. They were genuinely inspired, but knew that Castro's march into Havana wasn't ever going to be realistic in their own country, so they pivoted. They've spent more than 6 decades at this point, holed up in the country's rural jungles, particularly along the border with Venezuela. That is a fundamentally different animal from MS-13. Bukele's gangs made their living extorting and killing people on the streets they lived on, which meant that arresting enough of them really did dismantle the business. Authorities were also helped by the fact that they had a practice of placing gang-specific tattoos on just about every single one of their members' faces, which made hiding away your day job a bit of a struggle. So when it comes to Colombia, arresting its way through a guerrilla front dug into the Catatumbo Mountains with an international border 20 minutes up the road is like trying to win the Afghanistan war by arresting the Taliban. Sure, you can try, but you're probably going to fail. There's also the fact of financing. El Salvador's gangs were legit terrifying, but they were also pretty small time by Latin American standards, focusing on extortion and shakedowns. Colombia's biggest armed groups are more like Mexico's most powerful cartels, well-armed, well-financed, and battle-hardened. And yeah, that's groups, plural. The Clan de Golfo has as many as 10,000 fighters and can boast that they're the largest cocaine trafficker in the hemisphere. The FARC dissidents add several thousand more, split into rival blocs that spend as much time fighting each other as they do the state. Altogether, Colombian intelligence estimates that they comprise roughly 27,000 armed fighters spread across some 580 municipalities by the end of last year. That, by the way, is up from just 195 municipalities in 2019, a testament to how much of a comeback they've made. Oh, and as an added challenge, taking out any one of these groups would mean rivals immediately moving in to capture their businesses and territory. Like we said, though, Colombia has a track record of actually coming back from this sort of violence in ways that are quite remarkable and at least partially separate from the Bukele version. The homicide rate peaked at somewhere around 84 per 100,000 in 1991, with 28,280 people killed, and was still sitting at 70 per 100,000 in 2002, a year that set the all-time record at 28,837 dead. Medellin alone accounted for 6,809 of the 1991 killings, giving it a staggering rate of 380, which was then the highest on Earth. Fast forward 2 decades, and Colombia is almost a different country. The national rate was down more than 40% to 27 per 100,000. Keep in mind, that's still much higher than anyone would like. For comparison, the US averages roughly 6 per 100,000, and much of Europe hovers as low as 1. But still, visit Medellin as an obvious tourist in 1991, and you'd likely end up getting kidnapped. Visit Medellin as a tourist in 2026, and you'd likely just have a really nice time. There are some good art galleries, there's some amazing restaurants, and unlike Bogota, there's both a working metro and constant sunshine. Lovely! So, if not Bukeleism, then what did this? What sent Colombia's kidnapping rate plummeting a staggering 92% between 2000 and 2016? Well, it was a combination of a variety of factors, including years of professionalizing the country's security forces with assistance and training from Washington, who then proceeded to roll into the more rural areas and remove any guerrilla activity one location at a time. Insurgent groups went from boasting well over 20,000 members to around 5,000 during that time span too. Colombia did try its hand with incarceration during this time period too. Between 1994 and 2014, Colombia's number of incarcerated people increased by more than 300%, so they weren't exactly taking a wholly different approach to Bukele. But they never even came close to the numbers of El Salvador. Bogota locked up, at its peak, roughly 200 people per 100,000, whereas that ratio under Bukele is sitting at a very modest 1,659 per 100,000. That said, the Colombian armed forces were in better shape than they are today. According to a leaked army report, overall war material across the armed forces is reportedly in a severe deficit. Only 24 of its 49 Black Hawk helicopters are operational, and nearly 80% of the generous military spending is currently being allocated towards salaries and pensions. It is one thing to declare total war, but another entirely to do it without the manpower to back it up. And if there's anything to be learned from this past 4 years, it's this. If you don't back up the state's authority when push comes to shove, the insurgents will be there to step into the vacuum. Thank you for watching.